Shalom, brothers and sisters. May peace be with you. So as we talked about in part 3 of our video discussion here, was there any evidence that Mashiach appeared in the year 33 CE? Well, let's see if that can be answered by looking at Daniel's prophecy and examining how many years did Yeshua live on this earth after he met John the Baptist and was baptized. So let's use the book of Luke and the book of John in the New Testament as historical references. Okay, now we already read from Luke chapter 3. We talked about during the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar that Yeshua came up to John the Baptist and was baptized. But now let's go over to Luke chapter 4 and let's notice a thought here. Luke chapter 4 verse 1, we're going to use this for historical reference here to see if we can answer that question. Did Mashiach appear in the year 29 CE according to Daniel's prophecy about the 69 weeks? We talked about that in part 2 and 3. So notice here in Luke chapter 4 verse 1 and 2, it says, Then Yeshua, full of Holy Spirit, turned away from the Jordan, and he was led about by the Spirit in the wilderness for 40 days, being tempted by the devil. So we see here that after Yeshua was baptized, which was right about the time, as we said, during the time of Caesar's 15th reign, which was in the beginning of his 16th reign, which was in mid-September of 29 CE, Yeshua went to the wilderness for 40 days. So that tells us that Yeshua began his ministry in the fall of 29 CE. So now let's go over to the Gospel book of John, and let's see if we can get some information as far as how many years did Yeshua live on the earth. We're going to track that by looking at the festivals that are mentioned in the Gospel book of John. So here we are in John chapter 2, verses 13 through 16, and this would be the year 30 CE, because this is the next year. It says, Now the Passover of the Jews was near, and Yeshua went up to Jerusalem. He found in the temple those selling cattle and sheep and doves, and the money brokers in their seats. So after making a whip of ropes, he drove all those with the sheep and cattle out of the temple, and he poured out the coins of the money changers. Take these things away from here. Stop making the house of my father a house of commerce. All right, so this is this is John chapter 2. This is the Passover of the spring of 30 CE. Now let's go over to John chapter 5, and let's check out another Passover. This would be the Passover of 31 CE. It says, After this there was a festival of the Jews, and Yeshua went up to Jerusalem. Okay, and within these a multitude of the sick, blind, lame, and those with withered limbs were laying down. Now we know that two other festivals, the festival of dedication and of Purim, both fell during the time period from Chislev to Nisan. However, these festivals did not require an Israelite to go to Jerusalem. So this indicates then, according to the context, that this Passover here seems to be most likely the festival of the Jews that required Yeshua to attend in Jerusalem. So this was the Passover. All right, now let's go to another passage. Let's go to John chapter 6, and let's notice verses 1 through 4. This will be Passover number 30 in the year 32 CE. It says, After this, Yeshua set out across the Sea of Galilee, or Tiberias, and a large crowd kept following him because they were observing the miraculous signs he was performing in healing the sick. So Yeshua went up on a mountain and sat down there with his disciples. And verse 4 says, Now the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near. Okay, so this is Passover 32 CE. So now let's go to John chapter 11, and let's notice the next Passover. This is John chapter 11, verses 55 through verse 57. And it says here, Now the Passover of the Jews was near, and many people from the countryside went up to Jerusalem before the Passover to cleanse themselves ceremoniously. Notice that in verse 55. And then continuing on in verse 57, Get back over to that in verse 57. But the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that if anyone got to know where Yeshua was, he should report it so that they could seize him. 6 days before the Passover, Yeshua arrived at Bethany, where Lazarus was, whom Yeshua had raised up from the dead. Okay, so here we are now in Passover 33 CE. Let's continue on into John chapter 13 and continue this account. We read now some verses here. It says, now because he knew before the festival of the Passover that his hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father, Yeshua, having loved his own who were in the world, loved him to the end. The evening meal was going on. So after dipping the bread, he took it and gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. Now remember, Yeshua had 2 disciples named Judas. This one was the one who betrayed him, Judas Iscariot. After Judas took the piece of bread, then Satan entered into him. So Yeshua said to him, what you are doing, this is in verse 27, what you are doing, do it more quickly. So after he received the piece of bread, he went out immediately, and it was night. Okay, so now let's jump over to the events that occurred in John chapter 18, and let's track that. Then the soldiers and the military commanders and the officers of the Jews seized Yeshua and bound him. They led him first to Annas, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year. Then Annas sent him away bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Then they led Yeshua from Caiaphas to the governor's residence. It was now early in the morning. Okay, so that's John chapter 18. Now let's notice John chapter 19. And let's see what events occurred here. Pilate then took Yeshua and scourged him. And the soldiers, and by the way, when they say that they scourged him, it wasn't just a regular whipping. The way the Romans would scourge people at that time is they would take pieces of broken bone and they would tie it onto the strip of the leather strip, and they would put, like I said, jagged bone and then rock pieces of jagged rock and bone into that in those threads of leather of that leather whip, and so it would go deep into the cartilage of the skin. So continuing on, and the soldiers braided a crown of thorns and put it on his head and clothed him with a purple robe, and they kept coming up to him saying, "Greetings, you King of the Jews." They also kept slapping him in the face. So Pilate said to him, "Are you refusing to speak to me? Do you not know that I have authority to release you, and I have authority to execute you?" Then he handed him over to them to be executed on the stake. Since it was the day of preparation, so that the bodies would not remain on the torture stake on the Sabbath, for that Sabbath day was a great one, the Jews asked Pilate to have the legs broken and the bodies taken away. And remember, according to the Mosaic law at Deuteronomy chapter 21, dead bodies should not remain all night on the stake, but rather they should be buried on that day. So continuing on, John chapter 19 and verse 32. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first man and those of the other man who was on the stake alongside him. But on coming to Yeshua, they saw that he was already dead, so they did not break his legs. So now, friends, let's reason on this here. Let's go to the timetable. The first year of Yeshua's life after he was baptized by John the Baptist, according to the Gospels, That was the fall of 29 CE to September 30th CE. The second year was the fall of 30 CE to September 31st CE. And you can read the rest of that there. The 6 months